The work of just one developer, Hollowbody is a must-play for survival horror fans. With strong echoes of Silent Hill, it nevertheless tells a confidently original story, dripping with atmosphere, a solid variety of puzzles, great level design, and combat that starts off deceptively rare but will test your resource management skills. It's not a long game, taking 4 hours at the upper end to beat, but it's well paced and weighty enough to make you feel like you've come on one hell of a journey by the end. A huge thanks to Tom Copeland of Strange Signals for providing review keys for myself and for the Horror Game Awards jury. Nonetheless, all opinions expressed in this review are mine alone. Edware Games is just one person, Nathan Hamley, making Hollowbody the second significant indie survival horror release in 2024 that comes from a solo developer. But where Conscript's ambition was reflected in its enormous maps and 10+ hour playtime, telling a harrowing story about the horrors of war using only pixel art and text-based dialogue, Hollowbodies comes from feeling like it could genuinely have been a major release of the PlayStation 2 era. Casting that aesthetic in the gloomy greys of urban England, interrupted with the deep reds of sci-fi horror and the retro-futuristic blues and greens of the inventory and map UI, its presentation perfectly captures the oppressive gloom of the not-too-distant future we find ourselves in. The music and sound design too, also Hamley's work, builds in a sense of constant dread that will keep you on edge throughout. There are moments where the music takes centre stage, and it has a soundtrack that I feel in time will become as iconic as that of any survival horror title, but also those where silence prevails. And in between, especially indoors, 1,000 split-second cues that aren't in time to anything. They could just be the building settling, or they could be something lurking out of camera view ready to strike, an unsettling dissonance that never lets you fully relax. Outdoors, of course, this being England means the patter of rain is constant. The kind of rain that isn't quite a storm, but is relentless enough to make you wet and miserable if you're out in it for long enough. And those of us from this part of the world at least will have vivid memories of the misery that kind of wet and dark can create, when home and the warmth of central heating and a good cup of tea seem too far out of reach, so that every second stretches into infinity. This combination of mundane misery coupled with the looming dread of something beyond comprehension sums up the story and world of Hollowbody. The opening text tells us of a past bioterrorism event which necessitated the evacuation and destruction of major urban centres. Something any fan of Resident Evil can immediately relate to. And yet the response and the aftermath we find ourselves in 6 decades later is firmly rooted in the mundane dystopia of capitalism and the British class system that sadly isn't limited to science fiction. Monsters or not, the environments we traverse in the game will be intimately familiar to a lot of people in the UK, and the details we uncover of what happened has sharp echoes in our world. There are also strong echoes, as you might expect, of Silent Hill. Just searching for a missing person in a desolate town filled with monsters will do that, especially with the strong PS2 survival horror aesthetic. But you also have a Kotak radio, which, similar to the radio in Silent Hill, will give off static when enemies are nearby. It also has this additional story mechanic where you can use it when you get a stronger signal in order to play these snippets of conversations had by now dead residents. It's an effective and haunting piece of world building that adds to the tragedy of the city we find ourselves in. Even with the strong Silent Hill influence, Mika as a character comes off as strong-willed as Claire Redfield in Resident Evil 2, determined to find her missing partner at all costs. Voicing her, Kirsten Rhea sells her defiance, but also her fear and vulnerability as she interacts with horrors she wasn't prepared for, as well as the love, sadness, regret and hope we feel at different points when we get snippets of her past interactions with Sasha, who she is now searching for. It's a solid, believable and understated performance that sits perfectly within a well-told story that doesn't give you all the answers, and is stronger for that intrigue and mystery. There is one point of criticism I'll make in regards to the story, which also segues us into the gameplay, and that's a specific puzzle that you must solve when underground, involving hearts. The fact that it's never explained why we're doing what we're doing isn't a problem in itself, but it felt, at least to me, as though despite the cool aesthetic, it didn't really fit with anything else in the game. Especially as the solution presents the only time that the environment itself shifts around you. Despite that, the puzzle design in this game overall is great. There's a strong variety of puzzles, as you would expect in a survival horror title, some more complex and some simply a case of bringing the right item to the right place. None of them stumped me so as to stop the gameplay dead, but they were intriguing and I enjoyed solving them. They also fit well with a level design which uses familiar British architecture to great effect. We get a lot of backtracking and non-linear exploration in the block of flats, and at that point the number of enemies is fairly minimal. The combat here is very Silent Hill-like, with melee weapons available, but melee combat being clunky and fraught with risk, versus guns being a safer bet, but ammo very scarce. There aren't many enemies overall, so you only get a taste of it at this point, and when you venture into the wider city, they are for the most part easy to skate past. So it's very easy to view combat as secondary and not a big issue, until you get to a couple of later game locations where multiple enemies present themselves in very tight spaces. I didn't actually die in my first playthrough on the intended experience difficulty, but I had a fair share of very close calls. Trying to spam melee attacks can finish off enemies before they attack, or if you time it wrong can leave you open for an attack at the wrong moment, especially if you try and tackle more than one enemy at close quarters. And once you knock an enemy down, you have to stomp it to stop it crawling after you, as their slap can still pack a punch. The balance feels right to make you question whether combat is always the wise choice, and especially later on the choice between using ammo or taking hits becomes a much starker decision. There is some enemy variety, from more simple humanoid enemies to larger creatures, and also dog-like enemies. You can also see some slug and bug-like enemies, although these never appear to pose any kind of threat, so I'm unsure if they were actual enemies or just an aesthetic addition. However, one glaring omission is the lack of any kind of boss fight. There is one scripted chase/fight, but that's it. The game isn't hugely lacking for this, but it's worth mentioning. After a first playthrough, you unlock punished difficulty. This introduces the need to burn dead enemies to prevent them from returning, similar to the Crimson Heads in Resident Evil Remake. However, as you start with a lighter and don't require fuel to do this, there's not the same sort of resource or inventory management question around the mechanic, so at first sight it doesn't appear to add much to the gameplay loop. That may change further on into a punished difficulty playthrough. However, my first venture into the difficulty quickly taught me that the main change was that one enemy hit now put you in danger state, and a second killed you. This in itself isn't a bad thing, and it's a challenge I'll no doubt return to for the achievement, aptly titled Masochist. But 2 deaths in a row from the first enemy hallway, when I had no health items, and both times it being because the awkwardness of movement allowed a crawling enemy to slap me before I could stomp them, quickly discouraged me from going further straight away. It was also then I learned that you couldn't shoot crawling enemies, as the gun no longer locked on, foiling my plan to avoid the same fate again. Interestingly, there appears to be no change to what it takes to kill an enemy, just to the damage you take from them. Whilst this isn't my favourite implementation of a harder difficulty in a game, the only real criticism I have of the replay value of the game is the opening prologue. A short walk and talk section isn't bad in and of itself, but being unable to even run ahead to the cutscene does feel a little limiting on a second playthrough, especially as it's easy to do by accident, and I imagine that one is very quickly going to become the bane of speedrunners. But the positive side of that is that this does come off as a potentially very fun game to speedrun. The other features I unlocked from my first playthrough were Big Head mode, a novelty modifier making Mika look like a Funko Pop, and Dungeon Crawl mode, essentially a first person mode. There may be other unlockables which I've yet to encounter, but these were both fun additions. Though be aware that you have to equip them from the inventory, so you can't use either until the game lets you access that. Ultimately, despite some criticisms, Hollowbody is a fantastic game. Extremely well put together, atmospheric, with a haunting and enigmatic story and well-tuned survival horror gameplay. The genre revival of the 2020s is very quickly building up a core canon of really solid, already classic games, and this is definitely among them. It's also confirmed that deliberations over my personal game of the year for 2024 will be a very close 3-way battle, and I honestly don't know how I'm going to choose between this, Crow Country and Conscript. But that's a problem that only serves to show just how well survival horror fans are eating right now. If you're picking up Hollowbody, let me know your thoughts in the comments, especially if you end up finishing punished difficulty before me. I'm eager to know how that plays out as a complete experience. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. Like the video that just popped up, which YouTube thinks you should watch next. This is a Patreon and member supported channel, So if you want to become a member and unlock custom badges and emojis, early access to my videos, and your name in the credits, then click the join button below. Thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.